Hey everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. Everybody knows who Chris Hipkins is, and we're very lucky to have Chris Hipkins join us today. Hey Chris, how are you? Good to see you. Welcome to G News.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm pretty good. It's pretty cold here in Wellington today, but otherwise I'm good.
Oh, that's great. Chris, just want to start talking a little bit about what's been going on in world events. And a few days ago, Christopher Luxon said that New Zealand should be proud of not recognising Palestine as a state. What do you think of the position that he has taken on this issue?
The New Zealand government's position is simply disgraceful. We've previously led with principle on this issue. If you go back to the last national government, Murray McCully, Minister of Foreign Affairs during that government, was one of the people pushing resolutions in favour of Palestine at the United Nations, taking a very principled stance. So this is the least principled New Zealand government we have seen in several decades when it comes to the issue of Palestine. We should be continuing to lead with principle. That is not what Winston Peters, Christopher Luxon and David Seymour are doing at the moment.
Yeah, Labor have said that they will recognise the statehood of Palestine very quickly if elected. What are the key factors behind New Zealand needing to recognise Palestine quickly now?
We said before the last election that had we been re-elected, we would be recognising Palestine straight after the election. Obviously, we didn't get elected or didn't get re-elected, and that didn't happen. But it's a real, and we would have been one of the early movers in that regard. So we would have been one of the first countries to really say, okay, now is the time. Now we're in the position where we're likely to be one of the last countries in the world to do it. Australia, the UK, Canada, France, our friends around the world have all said, yep, now is the time. They're saying that because what's unfolding in Palestine, Israel's ongoing attacks on Palestinians, are simply unacceptable. It's an unfolding genocide, and we cannot remain neutral in that conflict. We do need to be saying, actually, this isn't okay. It's time to bring the two-state solution to fruition, recognise Palestine, and find a way to make a peaceful transition to the two states living in harmony.
It's been revealed recently that New Zealand First staffers wrote the cabinet paper and developed just two options for cabinet to consider over whether to recognise a Palestinian state. And they failed, as far as I'm concerned anyway, to ask Foreign Affairs for a recommendation. So just 5 ministers in the cabinet considered two recommendations only. And then they settled on our traditional position of when, not if, but not now. And why do you think New Zealand First ignored official advice, really, in this process?
It's not just that they drafted the paper themselves. Sometimes on politically contentious issues where there's a lot of internal negotiation within government, it's not unusual for a minister's office to ultimately be, drafting the final recommendations that go to cabinet. But when I looked at that cabinet paper, one of the things that stuck out for me was that there's no MFAT advice in there at all. So even where a minister's office drafts a paper, you'd normally get a section where it says, and here's the different agencies' comments on this paper. There's no MFAT comment in there at all. Now, that's pretty unusual that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where all of the expertise on these matters lies, hasn't been invited by the Cabinet to provide advice to the Cabinet in making this decision. That suggests to me this is all about the internal politics of the government. They don't want advice that they don't want to hear.
Do you think that there's an element here of constituency politicking, local politics, that this decision sheets back to a base at home more so than the advice that they could have actually sought?
I think when you look at Winston Peters' comments at the United Nations and elsewhere around the world, he's clearly playing to a domestic base as well as representing New Zealand's foreign policy. So when he talks about climate change, for example, and he says, oh, actually, it's up to the big polluters to solve this problem, not little countries like New Zealand, he knows full well who the base is that he is playing to back here in New Zealand. It's the people who think that climate change isn't real. And I just think that's absolutely woeful. And the fact that Christopher Luxon's quite okay with that and lets him get away with that, is embarrassing for New Zealand. He's our Minister of Foreign Affairs. His job is to represent New Zealand, not to represent the 5-6% of people who vote for New Zealand First, but to represent the whole country. And he is not doing that.
Winston Peters came out the other day and said that he supported the Trump 20-point plan, but there's many around the world now that are referring to this as a kind of a surrender or we'll finish the job ultimatum. Can you comment on that proposal at all, and perhaps what the implications are for Palestinian rights to self-determination, that kind of side of this, if things were to go really wrong here?
It's remarkable that we're in this position where the US and Israel have agreed a supposed peace deal without involving the other major party here, which is Palestine. That really, I think, is unacceptable. Having said that, no one wants to see this conflict prolonged. So I hope that this can be the catalyst for a peace agreement. Even if it's not exactly as it is now, it can be a stepping stone towards a peace agreement that sees hostilities end, that sees Gazans able to return home and a rebuild to get underway, that allows for all of the hostages to be released, that allows for a Palestinian state to formally come into being that is recognised around the world. Those are the things that we have to work towards. And if this is a stepping stone to that, I just hope that somehow we can end the absolute tragedy of what's going on now, where people are being starved to death through the lack of humanitarian aid, where children are being murdered, and where just ongoing on a daily basis we see this unfolding genocide that the world cannot turn a blind eye to.
Exactly. About 41 days ago, Labor's spokesperson for energy, Megan Woods, sent Simon Watts, National's Minister for Energy, a letter seeking a bipartisan approach, I think, to reform in the energy sector. And that letter got somewhere, but basically 2 days ago we had this story suddenly come out where you'd been on a plane and you suddenly heard, the New Zealand Herald is trying to contact your office because Christopher Luxon's seeking you go bipartisan by not repealing the reversal of the offshore, the ban on offshore oil and gas exploration. I mean, this is all a bit crazy. But what do you make of this whole situation? I mean, it doesn't sound like Christopher Luxon's very interested in a bipartisan relationship if he's pulling this kind of political stunt, does it?
Oh, it's a total three-ring circus. This is Christopher Luxon getting his blame in early for things going wrong on the government side. Let's throw a few facts on the table. In the last 5 years, despite the oil and gas ban, about $1.8 billion has been spent drilling for gas in New Zealand. Despite that $1.8 billion being spent, our gas reserves have continued to diminish. The idea that we're suddenly on the edge of a major discovery of gas, when we haven't had a major discovery of gas in New Zealand for over 20 years, despite billions of dollars being spent looking for it, is simply fanciful. We've got to face the reality. We are running out of gas. In the 1970s, abundant gas was a cheap source of energy for New Zealand. It isn't anymore. Even if they did somehow miraculously find a major gas field, it's not going to be abundant and cheap in the way that it was when Maui was first discovered and explored in the 1970s. We have other forms of abundant and cheap energy like geothermal, solar, wind, hydro that we can develop now. We should be focused on that. Megan Woods wrote to Simon Watts and said, look, we've got to recognise that there's a number of businesses in New Zealand that are reliant on gas because of the industrial processes that they have that are reliant on gas. So let's prioritise the remaining gas we've got left to support those businesses so they don't all disappear. And let's focus on supporting everyone else and then eventually those businesses to transition to a world post-gas. So why should we be using the limited gas we've got now to heat schools and hospitals when we can do that using electricity? Let's make sure we're changing those schools and hospitals onto electricity, save that gas for the businesses where the transition is more complicated, and then work with those businesses over a longer period of time to get them ready to transition to electricity. Megan wrote to Simon Watts to say, let's do that. That wasn't a political exercise. That was an exercise in necessity, recognising that even if we found gas now, it's going to be years and years and years before it's, the holes are drilled and it's coming on stream and available to serve those businesses. We've got a crisis right here and right now with not enough gas. And so let's work with them to make that happen. They decided instead to play politics with it and say, well, we're going to write to you and say, demanding that you don't reverse the reversal of the offshore oil and gas ban. The reality is that's not going to help us. What's going to help us is making sure that we're focused on renewable energy, because renewable energy is abundant, it's cheap, and it's going to give us a source of competitive advantage in the future in the way that abundant cheap gas did in the 1970s.
This morning you wrote on one of your social media pages that Crystal Luxon's decided to side with fossil fuel companies instead of lowering our power bills. And shortly afterwards, I was watching Simon Watts and Nicola Willis repeating to the press that our power bills have gone up because of a lack of investor confidence from the gentailers, thanks to Labor's 100% renewable energy policy and Labor's ban on offshore gas exploration. So why are they wrong, and what more should they have done in the couple of years that they've had in office?
It's just desperation from them. The reality is fossil fuels are running out. There is only a finite supply of fossil fuels anywhere in the world, and it's running out. We've got renewable energy in New Zealand that's abundant and it's cheap. There are some things we need to do. We need to have more battery storage. We need to change the way we think about our hydro lakes so that we're using them more as batteries and less as providing, the basic day-to-day electricity generation that we need. We need more wind, more hydro. We have geothermal in New Zealand, some of the best geothermal in the world, and we should be developing that at pace. I visited a business just yesterday, ecogas. They are taking at the moment about 100,000 tonnes of food waste that would otherwise be going to landfill every year, and they're turning that into gas. They're currently supplying, through that 100,000 tonnes of waste food, about 1% of the country's gas supplies. We dump in landfills about 4 million tonnes of food waste every year. If we instead converted that to gas, that's about 40% of our current gas supplies that we could meet through that. This is just about us being sensible here and not putting all our money on a pipe dream. The current government have decided they're going to spend $200 million of all of our money to look for gas that's probably not there. So they're going to spend $200 million probably drilling empty holes, when that kind of money spent on renewable energy projects could help us, could go a long way to solving our energy shortage right now.
Well, there's a few things here circling around. This morning, commentator Bernard Hickey gave a bit of an address on this, and he showed some data that suggested that gentailers have been making some pretty massive dividends and keeping the supply levels of electricity deliberately low so that prices and profits are maximised. And he passed the comment that they could have lowered some of their dividends. Did you want to comment a little bit on that? Do you think more could have been done by the gentailers to help us out?
The graphs paint a pretty dim picture, actually, if you look at it. Since Bill English and John Key effectively sold off half of the electricity gentailers, so Meridian, Genesis and Mercury, sold half shares in them. They stopped investing in new generation and massively increased the dividends that they were providing to shareholders. The graphs, they're all circulating on social media. You don't have to look too hard to find one. They tell a pretty grim picture. That started to change when we became the government, because we started to put a lot more pressure on to get them investing in new electricity generation. That is where the future lies. We need more generation. Unfortunately, the current government's emphasis once again is on profit taking rather than preparing for the future. It's in the gentailer's best interests not to develop more generation, because if there's less generation, it means they can force the price up and make a bigger profit and pay a bigger dividend to their shareholders, which is what they are set up to do. And that was what they were set up to do by a national government.
Exactly. When Christopher Luxon came to power, he promised to fix the economy. He promised that he was doing a big turnaround job and we were all going to get back on track. And now it's nearly 2 years down the track. And from my point of view, it's a broken promise. I mean, I'm just looking at it. Would you care to comment on this promise by Christopher Luxon and the actual track that we now find ourselves on?
Well, far from being back on track, the train has been derailed. It's laying on its side in a ditch. They said that they knew numbers and it was all going to be better because they understood business and everything would be rosy and everything would be great. And it was just everything was the last government's fault. And they're still trying to say everything's the last government's fault. 2 years on, things are worse than they've ever been. I've been visiting businesses who said this is not what we expected from National. Businesses who were reliant on government work have suddenly found all of that government work has disappeared. Businesses who were reliant on private sector work have found that that work's disappeared because the businesses that were doing the government sector work are now competing with them for the private sector work. And there's less private sector work in addition to that. This is a government that's really hurt business. And you see that in the mood of the boardroom, which of course is the mood of the 150 richest and most privileged people in the country. But even they are not happy with this government, and it just tells you everything you need to know about them. They don't know what they're doing, and they're really inflicting huge damage on the country.
I've actually seen Christopher Luxon and Nicola Willis blame Labor for unemployment by saying, well, it's about where it was projected to be before the last election. But at the same time that they do that, they take credit for lowering inflation, which is also about where it was projected to be before the last election. And then they steal credit for any small rise in GDP, quarterly GDP numbers. But then when it falls, they blame somebody else. And so what do you make of the blame game and this credit stealing that we're seeing from the government when it comes to these aspects of our economy all the time?
2 years on, it's time they started accepting responsibility for their own decisions. The spike in inflation hurt everyone around the world. New Zealand was about the middle of the pack. In terms of countries who saw the spike in inflation post-COVID, we were by no means at the top of the list there. We were around about the middle of the pack. Everybody went through that, and everybody's come out the other side of it. The difference is other countries, Australia, Canada, the UK, the countries we compare ourselves with, they're growing again, and we are not. Nicola Willis potentially has put New Zealand into a second recession in 2 years. That takes a certain kind of incompetence as a Minister of Finance to be able to achieve that. As other countries have recovered, New Zealand has not. And this government's economic policies are the reason for that. We've seen bad economic forecasts around unemployment before, and we were looking at those before the election. But they weren't as bad as the ones that we were looking at during COVID-19. And we made a decision that we were not going to allow that to happen. And so we kept people in work. This government, on the other hand, have made the decision that unemployment is just a casualty and that just something that we have to suck it up and deal with it. It shouldn't be. Governments have choices. We should be focused on keeping people in work and also getting young people into work. If we want to know why there are record numbers of people giving up and leaving the country, many of whom are younger New Zealanders, it's because there's no work for them here.
Yeah. 100,000 people may go on strike on the 23rd of October, and this is because, I think, of underspending on teachers, doctors and nurses, and this could go a lot wider, really. There's a bit of speculation. We've also seen massive pay equity theft impacting 180,000 low-paid workers. We're paying huge bills at home across the country now for our groceries. Our rates have all gone up. Power bills are up 11.4%. And all of this is going on, and there's really very little tangible help from the government in the middle of it. They call this a turnaround job, but boy, it's not fun for everybody. They're really being squeezed, and that sort of middle to lower income sector, which is a vast majority of New Zealanders, are really doing this quite hard. Labor, what do you think you can really help us here? Do you think you can really make a difference to the way that this is really going for us all?
Well, to be fair to them, they have turned things around. We were on the road to recovery, and now we're going backwards. So
Yeah, true.
they have succeeded. If their job was to have the country pointing firmly in the backwards direction and accelerating speed, that's what they've managed to achieve. There are choices governments can make, and this government makes bad choices. They prioritise tax cuts for landlords over investing in new houses. Investing in new houses would have created jobs and given people places to live, so we don't have people living under bridges and in shopping trolleys and in cars and garages. They could have chosen to invest more in healthcare, and instead they gave money to tobacco companies. They could have invested in our high-tech sector here in New Zealand to create good, well-paying jobs for young New Zealanders. Instead, they gave tax cuts to Google and Facebook and those big multinational tech firms. They've made bad choices. We'll make better choices. And they're the choices that are going to back New Zealanders. Christopher Luxon wants rich foreigners to come and save us. We can save ourselves, and we should be focused on backing Kiwis. Kiwis backing Kiwis is how we're going to get out of this mess.
Yeah. Well, the regions, they're crying out for help when it comes to housing, but they're not getting any help. And we've seen homelessness exploding, and they've seen the government denying that they've had any part to play in that. We've seen a whole heap of photo opportunities and talk about green shoots, but we've basically been seeing people leaving the country. Meth levels are up, and these good old companies that we've all lived with for years and years and years, they're all going belly up, and we're hearing about people dying in the corridors of hospitals while this government boasts about a few targets that they've met. Again, it's one of these things, like, it's quite grim. I mean, can Labor really fix this? Can people just put their vote somewhere and actually expect this to actually be put right?
I understand why people are losing hope. My message to them is there is still a lot of reason for optimism. There is still abundant opportunity in New Zealand if we make the right decisions. We have some things going for us that could set us up really well. We have an abundant supply of renewable energy at a time when the rest of the world is desperate for renewable energy. So let's double down and really go for it on that front. We are one of the world's most sustainable food producers. So let's make sure we're at the forefront, not just of producing food for the rest of the world, but showing them how it can be done sustainably, because that can also be a source of income for our country. Let's invest in ourselves. We have billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of New Zealand capital invested offshore. Let's make sure we're investing more of that here in New Zealand to create jobs for New Zealanders. Let's make sure we've got a health system that we really can be proud of. The next Labor government's priorities are very clear: jobs, health, homes, and re-election on the cost of living. We get those four things right, and New Zealand's future can be looking so much more positive than it is under this government.
Cool. We have seen an anti-Maori agenda. We've seen an anti-woke agenda. We've seen a whole lot of hatred over COVID, but possibly really about disinformation. And we've seen these minor parties trying to divide New Zealanders and try to get back into power. And a leader that's really missing in action and unable to call his coalition partners into line. So what do you make about the way that these parties are, dividing the nation? And I think, if you were to lead a coalition government, what would be different about the government that you lead going forward?
Christopher Luxon is letting Winston Peters and David Seymour run circles around him. I remember a moment during the leaders' debates before the last election where I said, if you end up in coalition with Winston Peters and David Seymour, they're going to run circles around you. And for the last 2 years, I've been vindicated every day, because that is exactly what has happened. And that isn't the way MMP should operate. A lot more New Zealanders voted for National than voted for David Seymour or Winston Peters. And yet, the way this government operates, you wouldn't think that. Actually, the National Party and Christopher Luxon were elected to lead the country. And they're not doing that. They're letting David Seymour and Winston Peters call all of the shots. That's not the way MMP should operate. So I'm focused on getting as much of the vote share for Labour as I possibly can. Because yes, compromise is required under MMP. That doesn't mean you should be supporting things that you said you wouldn't support. It doesn't mean you should be letting a small minority of people call the shots in the way that Christopher Luxon is. His absence is so notable on so many issues. He isn't providing the leadership that the country deserves.
The Prime Minister documentary about Dame Jacinda Ardern and what your team went through as the Labour-led government going through COVID, it's really inspiring a lot of people, and people who go and see this film are kind of waking up and feeling like they want to get more involved, because it shows that the public, for the first time, what you guys had to go through really behind the scenes. Have you seen that documentary, and do you have any reflections on it?
I confess I haven't yet been to the movies to see it, although I did live through it, so I kind of saw, I saw the original, and it was incredibly difficult. You know, it was unprecedented. I don't think any of us went into politics thinking that is what we were going to be confronted with, and that was what we were going to have to do. And I'm really proud of what we achieved as a government during that time. The exit from COVID-19 elimination through to living with COVID was really bumpy. There's no question about that. The cost of living crisis that we saw at the end of COVID, and combined with other things like we did see a spike in crime post-COVID. We have to own that and accept that that did happen. And we were too slow to respond to both of those things, that surge in the cost of living and the crime that we saw post-COVID. And we were too slow. And I'll own that. But I'm still very proud of what we achieved as a government. You know, as a team, we were forged through fire. And that's given us a certain steel that we'll take into our next stint in government.
Well, I think we feel a sense of loss since you guys have left the government, and we're really, you know, I think we're looking at our country has taken a bit of a turn for the worse. Well, a lot of the people that talk on my page, they talk about how we've lost a government who actually cares about us, and feel like things are sinking and getting worse all the time. And we just want a Prime Minister that's actually going to answer a question, you know, and so what do you think Labour can bring back that New Zealand has lost under this government?
I understand the sense of sort of despondency that's out there a bit at the moment. You know, people who want to see us being more caring, not focused on divisive debates, not focused particularly on things where we're divided by race or divided by gender identity and so on, but want to see us coming together to find common ground, are finding the world pretty overwhelming at the moment. And a lot of that divisive polarisation that we've seen in other countries like the US does seem to have made its way into New Zealand. And so I get asked about this a lot. And I've got a favourite story that I like to tell. And it's about the boy and the starfish. And an old man walks along the beach and he sees a boy throwing starfish back into the sea. And there's thousands of starfish that have been washed up on the sea. And the boy's picking them up one at a time and throwing them back into the sea. And the old man says to him, "Why are you bothering? You know, you're not going to make any difference." And the boy picks up a starfish and throws it back into the sea. And he says, "Well, I've made a difference to that starfish." And, you know, across New Zealand, every day, I get to see people adopting that kind of mentality. So when you feel it's a bit overwhelming and you're looking at the government and you're thinking, "I just hate what they're doing, I don't know what to do," think of that story and find something that you can do that helps someone else. Because through our own actions every day, we can lead by example and show New Zealanders that it doesn't have to be this way. And that is coincidentally is also the way that we're going to win the next election, by showing New Zealanders that it doesn't have to be this way, that we can actually care about each other, that we can look out for each other, and we can make a difference.
Thank you, Chris, for talking to us all here at G News today. It's been really good to hear your key messages for us and answering all our questions straight up like that. Thank you very much, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Good as gold. Great to talk to you, and all the very best.
Thank you.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah, right.